Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 21 of Platform Enterprise, the show that platforms radical solutions to our living crisis. I'm your host, Rachel Donald, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm a writer and a journalist. You can find my work over at www.platformenterprise.com and subscribe to get my newsletter and this podcast delivered straight to your inbox every week. On today's episode is designer and activist Charlie Waterhouse. Charlie has done fantastic work for both the Brixton Pound and Extinction Rebellion. And we had a fascinating discussion around alternative currencies, the power of communities, and also how to design a movement. It's an awesome conversation. And if you agree, I would be very grateful if you give the show a 5-star review and leave a comment to let us know what you think. Oh, also, you can watch this episode over on satellite. Head to www.platformenterprise.com, find this episode, and follow the links. All right, everyone, strap in and enjoy the show. Charlie, I'm thrilled to have you on the show today. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So you are the founder of, or co-founder, perhaps you'd prefer, of quite a few interesting movements across the UK. But I would like to talk, first of all, about the Brixton Pound.
Okay.
Yeah. How did that come about? It's been going on, 12, 13 years now?
Yeah, it was 2009. So, not actually a co-founder of the Pound itself, because that started in 2009. But I was kind of around in the ether from the start. My direct involvement started when the Pound did its second edition notes, and my day job, This Ain't Rock and Roll, which is a design and identity consultancy, did the design for it. So we did the notes that have got David Bowie on, Len Garrison, Violet Zabo, and all the kind of crazy design and stuff. And that then turned into doing that design work. Then sort of turned into just getting involved generally. And God, almost 10 years on, I'm still on the board. And we're about to head into a newly reinvented 2021 with putting the Pound on the blockchain, which is really interesting.
That is. Who are you doing that in tandem with?
So we're doing that with a setup called the Algorand Foundation. So Algorand, as I understand it, were something that was kind of initially incubated by some boffins at MIT. So hopefully that means they know what they're doing. And then the foundation is their kind of sort of is the social good part of Algorand, which is the currency. But it's like a kind of version. I think it's version 3 crypto. So it's not that kind of awful planet destroying monster that Bitcoin is or Ethereum is. So it's got almost negligible energy costs, which is handy and quite exciting.
I didn't even know crypto could be like that. I falsely assumed that Bitcoin and Ethereum are what they are because there was no better alternative yet.
No, so interestingly, the what was his name? Nagoshi, can't remember the euphemism for the sort of pen name of whoever dropped the paper about Bitcoin, landed about the same time as the Brixton Pound turned up. So you have these kind of two sort of responses to the financial crisis landing at about the same time, and then kind of 12 years later. So yeah, I mean it's simply a technology thing, that the way that you prove the ledger on Bitcoin's cryptocurrency is you have to prove that you've done all the data transactions.
Yeah.
So it's an immense drain on computer processing.
Right. Okay. I understand.
Whereas now it's done in different ways. You have a thing called proof of stake rather than proof of work. I don't properly understand that bit. That bit's not that interesting because it's really kind of boffiny and confusing. But
MIT.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. Before we get into the crypto-y thing, then let's go more into the history of the Brixton Pound. Then, you just said it was created in response to the financial crisis. What was the goal of the project?
So it came out of a thing called the Transition Town Network, and at the time, the transitions the whole sort of transition project was really based around how society copes post peak oil. So the idea that natural resources were going to run out, how does society cope? And then, of course, what's happened in the intervening years is it's not a case of coping post peak oil. It's about the shit's got way more serious, and it's about leaving it in the ground. And so the idea is really simple, that you have a parallel currency that circulates in a local area, and if you use that currency, then by definition you're spending your money with people who have more of a vested interest in the local area. The really simple example is you spend £3 on a coffee at Starbucks, and probably £2.95 goes to remote shareholders, almost certainly out the country. They've got no interest in anything other than selling more coffee. Whereas if you spend that £3 with a local business person, then hopefully they live in the area. They're going to have suppliers that come from the area. They're going to kind of reinvest it, and so you get this circular economy where the money circulates and stays in the area that it's spent. That's the simple idea. On one level, and the cynics were always kind of like, well, it's just like a voucher system, and it kind of is when it's pegged directly to the fiat currency, and that's what's really exciting about what we have the potential to do now, because it's moving it into a different space altogether, and eventually you can see a situation where the Brixton Pound isn't pegged to sterling, so there could be some kind of exchange rate. But what also the electronic element allows us to do is to bring in other forms of local economy. So local economy trading schemes, or time banking, or how do you give value to things that are difficult to monetize? Volunteering, often sort of stereotyped as the sort of the babysitting economy, that kind of unofficial way of sort of living and coping that sort of sits outside the sort of the economic sort of frame. And I think that will be really interesting to see how, in a world where everything has a price and not much has value, how you can try and redress the balance.
It sounds a lot like the and I talk about this on the show a lot, but it sounds a lot like the theories of creating a culture of care, an economy of care, giving value.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. We were lucky enough as well, with a different hat on, we were lucky enough to just start to work with David Graeber before he died last year, and his absolute focus was about, in a world where production and consumption are so intrinsically linked and are so damaging, how can you replace production and consumption with care and freedom? And so building that thing. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the project for all of us, I guess.
Is it difficult to envision what a currency could be, or what the Brixton Pound could be? Do you think that there's a certain entrenchment in our current ideals or values that make envisioning, an alternative possibility incredibly difficult?
I think it is difficult, yeah. But that's the really important thing. It's the imagination, and I think that's one of the reasons why the Brixton Pound has survived when many other local currencies haven't. And that's because I think we always realised, thanks in no small part to the fact that we had Bowie on a note, which kind of gave it, it made it bigger.
Yeah.
Bigger than it actually was, because it became an iconic kind of thing, and it was a really weird thing, and it made money that looked like it could easily be dismissed. It turned it into something else. It turned it into space money. It's kind of like, imagine a world where instead of the Queen, or instead of a dead president, you can have David Bowie, Ziggy Stardust on your money. That's got to be a better place to live, right? And I think, that's the key. It's that, it's like, what's it, Einstein, the Einstein quote, where he kind of says that imagination is more important than knowledge, because knowledge is sort of all that we know up to this point, whereas imagination encompasses all that we know and all that we ever will know. And that's the thing. It's vitally important to be able to imagine ourselves in change, and imagine that change is possible, because we've had nearly 50 years of being told that there is no alternative, that neoliberal economics is the only way, and everything gets subsumed into that. And even when it's criticised, that system is really good at sort of absorbing that as constructive criticism. So it ends up being sort of grist to the mill, and so we're kept in that kind of space where it's really difficult to see our way out of it, even whilst we know it's killing us.
Yeah.
So it is really difficult to imagine, but that's why you've got to go and do daft things like create money that kind of looks like money, but like nothing you've ever seen before. So that makes a statement.
Yeah. It's very punk.
I guess, yeah. I think there's lots of. I'm quite fascinated with the kind of the carriers of the flame, or the way the kind of lineage of sort of disruptive people, or kind of goes down through history, and you can draw a line. And so, very punk, or is it very hippie, or is it very beatnik, or is it very bohemian, or is it very, and you sort of touch these figures in all cultures. Wherever you come from, you will have those figures in sort of English, in the English narrative. There's a line that goes from Johnny Rotten to William Blake to Shakespeare to wherever, and it'll be the same everywhere.
Yeah, what's so interesting about all of them is that, the cultural definition will change according to the period, but what defines them all is it's disruptive.
Yeah. It's that kind of that willingness to I don't know, like in Shakespeare's comedies, or where you go off to the woods and men dress as women and women dress as men, and everything's turned upside down. And in doing that, you kind of are able to see the problems at court in a new light, and then go back and resolve them.
Very interesting. Very what's the Greek god as well? The Greek god of the wine and the orgies and Bacchus. Yeah. Very that as well. Okay, so tell me then about where Graeber helped steer the conversation then, or the project while he was on board.
Well, that was the work with David. Was we came across him through our involvement in Extinction Rebellion. So I think where that steers things, and it was it was obviously a complete blow when he died.
Yeah.
And we'd only just got to know him, and it was that kind of, we were going to do so much amazing stuff this year.
Yeah.
That was the nothing that we'd planned in concrete, but that was the idea. So I don't know that David's had that much of a direct influence on things yet, but I think he will do. And there's a whole heap of people wanting to take that work forward. And his next book that's going to be out soon, that's more kind of traditionally anthropologically focused. Is that the right way to say that? That's going to be really interesting. Kind of looking back at ancient societies and kind of the kind of worlds that we don't get taught about in that kind of classic, kind of Greco-Roman trajectory. So I think I think his influence is going to be unbelievably big over the next few years, just because he was able to, on one level, he was just able to make these enormous things feel really tangible and human. Yeah. I don't know whether you've seen the latest Adam Curtis series.
No.
It's a I think they end up. It was on the BBC, but I think they end up getting posted to YouTube fairly quickly. So you might be able to pick it up in Holland. It's called "Can't Get You Out of My Head," and it's kind of looking at the kind of general sort of chaos of now and how to explain it. But it's bookended by a David Graeber quote that sort of, I'll paraphrase it not very well, but it's kind of the big realization is that we created this world, and so therefore we can easily do it differently.
Yeah.
Or not easily, but we can do it. And it's that kind of thing that it is that kind of simple. We are part of the system, but we're also complicit in that system. So we just have to rethink it, redo it.
Yes, of course. I
And that's
mean,
like the concertina ring again. It's kind of like, yeah, that's really simple. Oh, fuck, how do we do it?
yeah. I
Yeah.
think it's interesting because people always talk about, change and change in behaviors, but it's true. I mean, the civil disobedience of an individual becoming a group, becoming a mass movement can have huge impacts. And then also, I mean, if just a couple of the elite were to change their behaviors, it would completely change the world. It would completely change the world. And that's what social inequality is as well. It's like, it's not just economic, it's the inequality of impact,
Yeah.
you know? When people have fantastic ideas or people have the right values or the right intentions, and it just doesn't ripple through because, I
Yeah.
mean, they're, blocked into by a neoliberal system, essentially. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that point about kind of people in the elite is really important. Mark Fisher, I think, talks about that in Capitalist Realism really succinctly. He calls it a Ratner's moment, and so that was, I don't know whether so Ratner's was a really crap jewelers, high street jewelers that sold poor quality jewelry at a low price, but the stuff was rubbish. And the people that bought it knew it was rubbish. The people that were selling it knew it was rubbish, but everybody was quite happy to carry on with that understanding. But it was the moment that Gerald Ratner stood up at his AGM and said that what they were doing was selling crap to people, the company collapsed. Because it was like the emperor's new clothes had been pointed out by the emperor himself, and he draws allusions to, I think it was Khrushchev in that post-war Soviet Russia, where Khrushchev, everyone that was living under communism knew it was problematic. Everybody that was looking at communism from outside knew it was problematic, but it was when Khrushchev stood up at the Politburo or whatever and admitted that there were problems in the system that kind of made perestroika and the fall of the Berlin Wall inevitable, even though it took 30 years or whatever. So it's that kind of thing of like, when things are existing in plain sight, you just have to have a few people who admit that. And it's like, when Toto pulls the curtain back at the end of The Wizard of Oz, and you see things revealed for what they are, then change things that seeming, previously felt impossible become inevitable. That's what happens after a sort of moment of sort of crisis and scandal. The dam bursts, and you kind of go, what, really? It's like, how the hell did the world go through the last few decades knowing that Hollywood had a thing called the casting couch, and nothing ever happened?
I don't know about
And
that.
then, okay, so the idea that a female actress could get decent roles and could get to the top by sleeping with the powerful men.
Yeah, the Weinstein.
And it's kind of like, it's just it's hiding in plain sight. And it's just one of those things, and that it's wrong, and etc. But it's only then when Harvey Weinstein gets outed that the Me Too movement explodes, and it's kind of like, how does that work?
Yeah.
It's not like you couldn't see it before, but then after the fact, it's kind of like, yeah, of course, this is outrageous.
What is that? It's this, it's the piercing the illusion, going past, I'm thinking Heideggerian in terms like going past the veil, into the clearing, and making just a whole another kind of like ontology possible just by that action. But it's true. How interesting. And I'm thinking so much now of Extinction Rebellion. Right. Which essentially, and a lot, like, critics don't really understand, like, what are you doing? Why are you causing, why are you causing unrest? Why are you doing this? Why are you breaking things? And it's to draw attention, constantly draw attention until more and more and more and more people draw attention. And the incredible thing about Extinction Rebellion has been how it's taken off in 2 years. I can't think of any other social movement that has just exploded like that across the globe in such a short period of time.
Yeah, it's pretty nuts, isn't it? It's, it's timing. Had it happened a couple of years before, maybe it wouldn't have done.
Yeah.
But I think the time was right for it. But also, I feel very strongly that it's part of that kind of willingness to exist in that absurd space that XR has, and certainly evidenced when it turned up. I mean, the idea of a pink boat turning up and blocking a central thoroughfare is just, I mean, it's ridiculous, isn't it? But when you see it happen, it's a kind of it's one of those wonderful moments that kind of says way more than logical protest or that traditional attritional approach to resistance sort of says. And I can see why lots of people struggle with that, because it's not the way the kind of the traditional left does things necessarily.
Sure, but why would that be the absurdity? I mean, surely the absurdity would be the fact that 100 corporations are emitting 71% of emissions and governments won't do anything about it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Why is it that citizens standing up for themselves? Why is that the absurdity?
No, I know.
It's
nuts, isn't it?
I saw the thing that the action last night with the Barclays window being broken or something.
Yeah.
And it was funny because I still felt that initial ooh, destruction of property thing. And I was like, it's a bank, Rach. Like, they can afford it. It's, they have the money to repair the window, but we don't have the resources to continue to allow them to fund the awful things that they're doing.
No, absolutely. And also what I love about it is that it takes us straight back to the beginning of the 20th century, and where the breaking of a window is an act of suffragette disobedience as well. And so in terms of the kind of the stock reactions and the things we're wanting people to subliminally think about, it's things like that. And it's kind of like that realization that or that acknowledgement that in a Britain's a dystopian hellscape in many respects at the moment. You've got a government that's clamping down on protest.
Yeah.
You've got a government that obviously wants to remove rights from people that it doesn't want causing it trouble. And so to be able to go, hang on a sec, that's the kind of stuff that used to happen to the suffragettes. And
yeah, it's also
how do you sit with that?
It's also the stuff that used to make fantastic plot lines for apocalyptic or dystopian fiction.
Yeah.
Imagining that being possible was impossible. Because I think, and I don't know, maybe if this is something to do with the civil rights movement, but maybe because there was always this hierarchy of rights in that the white individual was kind of on top, or in particular the white man. But now that those rights are being eroded as well by economic principles and economic particularities, I wonder if, that kind of neoliberal maw is just coming for everyone now, and we're noticing it more. I think especially people that would have previously perhaps not been affected by most of the restrictions. It's like the capitalism and neoliberalism, like these principles are just these constantly famished things that need to be fed.
Yeah.
And with this kind of disintegration of the middle class, and not having a group of people that are majority enough to bubble and distract from what's going on. We're really seeing that more and more. I don't think citizens feel protected by their governments. I don't think they should feel protected by their governments. The illusion is cracking, but what can be done with all of the liberties being taken away?
Yeah.
Mental. But that's why community work is so important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, totally. I mean, that yeah. We're having autonomy and having sort of personal and immediate agency with those around you, and that I'm hoping is something that we will see manifest post lockdown. I mean, who knows? The pressure to get back on the hamster wheel is going to be enormous.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to go on holiday. They want to. You can easily see the machine starting up, but I've got this feeling that in that sort of first period of lockdown, when everyone went, there's got to be a new normal and I can hear birds, then there was that kind of, now go back to work, and being forced in Britain especially to sit and stew for a second time. I wonder whether people thought first time round, we want this to be different, but when it actually comes to it now, we feel it, and I'm definitely seeing I live in Brixton in South London, which is a relatively kind of small area, and there's a good network of people, community workers, activists, kind of disruptive types, and it's one of those kinds of places. But I can see that even in an area like that, the willingness for people to work with each other is beyond what it's ever been before. Whereas previously people were kind of like, we're all after like the same slither of grant funding, or it's my way, not your way. That's kind of evaporating. So I mean, I just hope against hope that that's being replicated in every town across the world.
I mean, I've heard it being replicated in communities with individuals. Like I interviewed Matt, who co-founded Woodbine in New York, and he said that the pandemic has been amazing for the organization, mostly because people now have time. Like they were getting laid off in the United States. And people just desperately, A, needed something to fill their day, and B, needed to have some kind of autonomy over doing something to fight the incoming waves of precarity. And he was like, the organization has just exploded. It's amazing. Which has enabled them to like provide food for the most vulnerable, and provide shelter even over the winter for people. But I didn't know that like intra-organizational kind of, what's the word? Cooperation was on the increase.
It definitely feels that way. And I mean, I'm convinced that sort of transdisciplinary approach to things is going to be the key.
Yeah.
It's bringing, rather, because everybody sort of plows their own furrow. You have your own specific area of sort of interest and expertise, and especially in the kind of world, the social media driven sort of algorithmic world we live in, you get ever more focused in on your things. Don't you? And you don't take in outside influence as easily as one might. And I think that's going to be key to have that alchemy between you have someone that understands economics or politics, working with an artist, working with a healthcare professional, working with doing that kind of thing. There's a wonderful sort of activist, academic artist in the States. God, what's her name? I've got her book here. Cassie Thornton, and she's written this book called The Hologram.
Yeah.
We've got this concept called the hologram, and she came across that in this idea in Greece post the 2008 crash, that as the Greek healthcare system was collapsing, if you went to a doctor, you wouldn't just go and see a doctor. You would see a doctor and a social worker and a therapist, and you'd see 3 people.
No.
And so you weren't immediately walking into a medicalized space. You were walking into a space that kind of, you were just an incomer, and you were presenting your concerns. And it might be that it was something that was dealt with medically or therapeutically or from a social work point of view. But until you talked to all 3 people, you didn't know. And so she's creating this idea of the hologram, where the hologram is actually, you have 3 friends, and you each support each other, and over a period of time you get to know your nuances and your foibles and your challenges and how best to deal with them. But there's no kind of hard and fast rules about how things get sorted out. But that in doing that, you have sort of a group of 4 people, and each one of those 4 people then has other people, has other people, has other people, and you just grow this interdependent resilience at ground level. And it's just really simple.
There's a lot of that coming up at the moment, that kind of idea of like self-management. Even in management theory, a guy called Frederic Laloux, I think, he wrote about this teal management system, which is
yeah.
Have you heard of it?
I've heard of teal, yeah.
Yeah, so this idea where like people don't have roles, and they're not in departments, and they're not in teams, but they each come with a skill set. And whatever project or problem arises, these people in the company all self-organize to like who's the best to respond to this particular situation. And then leadership as well is very, very fluid and flexible. And there's only a handful in the companies that are working with it. One of them being Starbucks, who you mentioned earlier, actually, which is really interesting. And I think United Airlines in the United States. I don't know, but these companies have seen huge success with essentially destroying the concept of hierarchy and empowering people to fulfill whatever needs to be fulfilled.
Just goes to prove you can be an anarcho decentralized fan and still run an airline. We're doomed.
No, but even I think it's a good use case.
Yeah.
I think it's a great example, and I think especially when, the easiest way to attack the left, capital T, capital L, or attack activists, or attack anybody who dares, demand better or think differently, is to say, well, it's not realistic. Well, hang on a second. Absolutely. Starbucks says it is.
Yeah.
No,
totally.
Yeah, again, that cross-disciplinary approach. I've heard about the hologram. I haven't gotten my hands on it yet, but you're the, I think, third person to mention it to me, so I must get on it.
No, it's good.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about with the Brixton Pound, right, is the praxis of it, i.e., how did you get people to agree to start using it? Like, how did you get, and maybe not individuals, but businesses, because it's so complicated for businesses. If their supply chain is long, and at one point they have to pay money, and then at the end point they're not receiving sterling, they're receiving something else. How did you convince people?
So I think on one level that's the abiding challenge of that kind of first iteration of local currencies, because they're pegged to the national currency, and because you're constantly challenged, you don't have the resources to, in Brixton, it was always a voluntary organisation, so you're constantly managing those challenges. So there's a hell of a lot of work involved in doing that. So it's knackering, and a lot of the schemes that have fallen by the wayside happen because you've got a management board that sets things up and then disappears, and they don't have the succession planning, so that kind of that personal input disappears, and then you've got that kind of it's like the kind of finger in the dike kind of approach, that it's like what you're doing is kind of so small compared to the system that you're kind of up against, that it's really hard to get people convinced to use things. What worked for us in Brixton, there were several practical levers. The council agreeing for business rates to be paid in Brixton pounds.
Wow.
So that businesses could kind of get their money out when they needed to. But of course, that then is something of a Pyrrhic victory, because you're basically just kind of going, you can play with this for as long as you want to, but don't worry, there's some real money behind it.
Right.
So there's the artifice in there, and that's where the kind of the currency as an idea always loomed larger than currency as an actual tool. I'll come back to that in a sec. Good relationships with local businesses, kind of a few people in the team who just knew everybody. So you were having conversations with people all the time. So it was a social thing that encouraged use. But I think that the reason I'm convinced of this, the reason that the Brixton Pound is still around now after 12 years or whatever, where other currencies have either disappeared or are unrecognisable, is because we allowed ourselves to get distracted quite quickly. So it was never just about the currency. We constantly had daft ideas. So we've got this currency. What can we do next? Well, let's start a lottery. So we started a lottery, and it's kind of like, okay, if we start a lottery, what do we do with the lottery? And we realised that people that won the lottery didn't take the winnings. They kind of let us keep them. That was amazing. It was like, that's not how lotteries work. This is brilliant. So then we set up a bonus fund, because we can reinvest the profits from the lottery, plus the fact that the winners don't claim their winnings, into giving micro grants to activists or local community organisations that are too disorganised and too small to ever get any money from anyone else. So we invested in that. So it was like the world's most hapless kind of seed funding. So it was like someone would turn up and go, I've got a mad idea, and we'd go, great, do you want 500 quid? And they'd go, yeah. And so we did that. And then the there's a couple of railway lines that go through the centre of Brixton, lots of railway arches, and the company that, or the Network Rail, the organisation that looked after the arches, was redeveloping them. And we knew one of the local businesses was a cafe, and they wanted to get out. They wanted to get out, but they wanted to not get out so they couldn't get compensated. So they said, could you do us a favour and look after our shop for us whilst we go and do other things? And so we took over this arch, and we thought, oh my God, we've got an arch. What do we do with that? We can't let that go to waste. And so it was like, so we turned into started putting on poetry readings, or it was like, oh, it's got a shop front. So can we sell stuff? So we kind of made T-shirts, and then sort of sold T-shirts for other people, and it's kind of things like that. And then the arch came to an end, and we thought, well, we quite liked that experience. Let's see if we can find anywhere else. And we found a place just up the road which had been a cafe. It was like, excellent. What would a cafe look like if the Brixton Pound was to have a cafe? So we set up this cafe that was pay as you feel, and only used food that would otherwise have gone into landfill. And it was also veggie and vegan. So it was a veggie-vegan cafe using food that was about to be thrown away that you didn't have to pay for if you didn't want.
Wow.
Again, the world's worst business model. But in doing that, we had this amazing community hub. And then it was like, oh, and let's make sure that we give work experience to people with like loads of neurodiverse people. So it was this wonderful otherworldly space that you would go into, and you walked in and you either went, what am I doing here? I'm never coming here again. Or you walked in and felt like you'd come home. And so you had this amazing space where all kinds of like excellent, dysfunctional, open-minded, marginalised, but we had people on day release from the local mental hospital rubbing shoulders with, kind of retired grannies. People could turn up and get food. We had people who didn't have any money who could just come and get food, and there were other people who would pay twice as much as they should for them, and it just worked brilliantly. So in terms of praxis, what we ended up doing was not really running a local currency. We were this, we are this kind of crazy social thing that just happens to have some money with pictures of David Bowie on, and also 2 notes with black faces on as well, which is like an amazing thing for London as well. There was a brilliant Vice article when the notes were first launched, where Vice, being Vice and totally full of themselves, but also quite funny, took Brixton Pounds down to Cold Harbour Lane to see if they could score drugs off the local dealers. And to their credit, the dealers were like, "No, we only take like real money, mate. But these notes look really good, and it's good to see some brothers and sisters on money for a change. But you should probably spend it in the farmers market down the road." So yeah, praxis is really terrible, isn't it? When you don't have the resources, and you're doing this David and Goliath battle with a system that can just throw people and time and resources at the thing that you're trying to
undermine. Yeah. So that inspired some thinking about, even if everybody in Brixton was to use the Brixton Pound, capitalism was not going to come begging on its knees in penance. And if the local currency grows so that it's in every town and every city, then do you just become the thing that you're seeking to undermine anyway? Yeah. So that sparked a sort of period of thought where it's like, well, maybe what one doesn't do is you don't apply the same sort of business models to this, but what you're actually doing maybe is exporting values rather than sort of economics. Yeah.
And so we did this daft thing where we invented a country, and we called it a nation state of mind called Brixtopia, where it didn't matter where you came from. Everybody could be a member of Brixtopia and could be a Brixtopian citizen, as long as you signed up to. There was like a kind of an 18-point manifesto that was basically built around being, kind of excellent and kind and loving and accepting and all of those kinds of things. And that was quite interesting. And we did kind of daft sort of art interventions and kind of just played around with things. But it's quite funny how now one can look at I look at a lot of what's happened in XR and kind of go, yeah, that's why we were doing Brixtopia. It was to get ready for this kind of stuff. And you see lots of people that have come from that. So I know you've spoken to Claire Farrell. We worked with her and her body politic project around, kind of making the body an instrument of protest and stuff. And we worked together on Brixtopia and doing that kind of thing, and sort of bringing all these seemingly daft pieces of sort of art that, on the face of it, give people a nice time, but don't really kind of mean anything. It was all just like, that's part of that sort of preparation for what's happened with XR in part, certainly from that creative side.
I wonder, it seems vital to have taken that direction, to first have created Brixtopia and the Brixton Pound and these social organizations where the most important thing is to be a good community member and to support your community. And then saying that the next step of that is the civil disobedience, is the unrest, is the destruction, the saying no. Because I think so many people would think it's the other way around. First you shout and you yell and you try and get what you want, and then you try and build something good, once you've gotten your hands on the conch.
Yeah.
And when you look at, people talk about, communism and the USSR and, it's just, communism done wrong, which, in terms of Graeber's everyday communism, yes, of course, it's communism done wrong. But they didn't try, that group of men didn't try to be good and then didn't figure out how to be the best they could possibly be and then try and change their country. They tried to change their country in order to figure out how can we be the best we can be, and it resulted in terrible, terrible violence.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's the difference with this community-run approach as opposed to political.
I think it's the twin difference, isn't it, of approaching it that way. If you can't visualize what you're heading towards, how do you know when you've got there? So you've got to do it that way. And then I think the other thing is, as you just said, it's that group of men. And if it's almost certainly time for us men to kind of go, look, we had a crack at it. It didn't go very well. Would you like to have a go? Without sounding patronising, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And one of the most amazing things, and it's been quite weird for us in the art group in XR, is we've come across quite regularly sort of Indigenous elders, which has been totally bizarre because it's not a world that any of us have inhabited before. That's just weird, and we kind of like the fact that it's weird. But we repeatedly get told that what's happening now is, and I think this is American wisdom, is that the condor is going to meet the eagle, and it's, I know it sounds amazing, doesn't it? But the way I understand it, and I might be wrong, is that we've had these few centuries of patriarchy, and you can look back in, maybe you can date it back to the rise of print. And after the rise of print, the second best-selling book after the Bible was the Guide to Witch Finding, and that kind of so there was that so we've had that period of the patriarchy really fucking everything up. And what's going to happen now isn't a kind of a complete tip back to a matriarchal world. It's going to come into some kind of balance.
Because, and I think that's very important to note, the idea would not be to just go to the binary opposite, because it's not about man and woman or male and female in terms of sex. It's about the values that we've ascribed to these genders.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And we've all got, to a greater or lesser degree, male and female traits inside us. So it's just about being in harmony. Yeah. Yeah.
How interesting. The eagle and the condor.
Kind of a weird. Yeah, exactly. Being a weird Indigenous hippie from time to time has been one of the big eye openers.
Amazing. Do you know what though? Right, it is an eye opener, surely, because we have this thing that the West essentially dominates culturally.
Yeah.
So much so that capitalism has infiltrated China, as much as it would like to pretend otherwise. And because we our needs are met. we tend to assume, we have the most developed economies, not collaborative economies or human economies, but just economies. So therefore, we're the most ahead, and we have to be the people to figure it out because we're so far ahead. We have to sort the rest of the world out,
Yeah.
But surely there is a lot to be found in other anthropological models and modes of being and of organizing.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. Thousands of years of wisdom. We struggle for our knowledge to go back. The best we get most of the time is, in Britain, you go, if you're lucky, you go back to the time of Christ that nobody really understands.
Yeah.
If you're lucky, you get the odd Roman ruin, and then it's a jump to Stonehenge that no one has a clue about. And it's kind of we're totally distanced from anything else. But really, and I mean, I guess it's broadly similar across great swathes of Europe. You go back, certainly in Britain, 1,000 years, 1066, when the current ruling family started properly setting themselves up, and then after that you have that whole enclosure of the commons, the kind of the removal of the people's relationship to the land that they're born of, and that's where the story of separation in Britain starts. It's kind of what we're doing on an industrial scale all over the world now. I mean, obviously we've been doing it for quite, certainly since the Industrial Revolution, but that's sort of what happened to us earlier. So it's all, that wisdom is crucial because it will enable us to understand that we are not just products of industry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. I mean,
so again,
if we continue to be, we won't have a planet to have any industries on.
Yeah.
So it's very much become an existential problem as well.
Totally. Yeah.
How interesting. Do you think that the future has to be community led? Like lots of different pockets of communities?
I think it'd be a lot more pleasant if it is. I think it'd be a much nicer place to live. And I think, in Holland at the moment, you've got sort of Amsterdam building its planning approach around Kate Raworth's donut economics, and you've got Paris talking about the 15-minute city where everything is closer, and I think being able to do that's this kind of idea that you have to sort of get in your car or on a train and travel for an hour to your place of work to then travel back and be only having community at weekends, and that's kind of not how we really want to live. And I think having a lot of those kind of privileged distractions removed from us over the last year has been amazing. Number of people that are kind of going, I don't want as many friends now. I'm much more self-reliant than I ever thought I was, and that kind of thing is like, that's really weird. On the face of it, that sounds like a bad thing. It sounds like, you're a bit of a miserable old sod, aren't you? But actually, no, it's just about not being constantly distracted and not being, in that kind of never-ending, whatever it is, melee
like overstimulated all the time.
Yeah.
I think on the other end as well, the people that have said, "I need my friends." This real combat of, individualist society being like, no, that's not how this is meant to work. Because, everyone I know, like, our mental health is flat. Well, I'm okay because I get to have all these interesting conversations with people like you. But, like, generally, everyone's mental health is really, really flatlining because we're not meant to be locked away from each other. It's not locked up, locked away from each other.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah.
And
but it's about making those interactions count, isn't it? And I think it's that kind of that everybody can now agree that living life in a Zoom meeting is not good. But then I also kind of go, like, we have conversations like this. That's amazing.
Yeah.
But that's the bit where technology allows you to have a conversation across
borders,
time zones and borders. When you're taking a dysfunctional office meeting into an online space where you're kind of going, this is making me really tired, and those kind of little quirks that I used to find quite funny in the office are now just really annoying. You know, that's that kind of thing where you move into, I mean, again, Graeber, the whole sort of bullshit jobs kind of idea of what are we supposed to be spending our time on whilst we're here, and it's not justifying ourselves in an economic system.
Yeah,
it's absolutely not what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with you. You know, the final sort of thing that I want to get into with you is because you're a designer, I want to talk about first of all the design of the Brixton Pound, like why you chose to make it the way that it is, and then also designing disobedience, designing protests.
Yeah.
Because I think that too often people assume disobedience or, you know, is essentially just an emotional reaction and unprepared. Whereas in a lot of what you're saying, I can hear and I can now see the examples of protests in which there is this design thought that's coming through all of it, how to make it effective. And I'd be very interested to hear more about that. So first, the pound.
Yeah, the pound. Yes. So when you see the Brixton Pound notes, you kind of see that they're recognisably money. So, I mean, partially that's just doing a decent design job. You know, graphic design answers a brief in it, and it has inherently has functionality built into it. So we took the approach that we were going to consciously follow the received design rules around currency, which means that you have prominent figures, you have prominent landmarks, and you kind of try and reflect the area that your money comes from in money form, but then pull the rug from all of those things. So prominent landmarks were graffitied walls, prominent people were black faces, women, space aliens, you know, all of that kind of stuff. So you looked at it and go, that is money. I intrinsically understand what to do with this, but really?
Yeah.
Can this happen?
Yeah.
And then you go, yeah, you can spend this in 200 places round here. And that's the mind-blowing moment where you kind of go, shit, I didn't know that was possible. So it's kind of using sort of design almost against itself. Because the temptation would be to kind of totally reinvent it and make it look unlike anything else and shifting into a different space. But that then would render the statement less powerful, I think, because we absolutely knew that what we had to design had to be better than the alternative. So to do that, you had to be recognizable as what it was. So it's kind of being really conscious of the power of that, and it was similar then with the way we approached the XR work. I mean, it went hand in hand. We were lucky enough to be involved right from the start, and so we were involved with the naming and everything else on from that, and that went hand in hand with the kind of strategic thinking and the research that had gone into it as well. So we were able to kind of reflect all that. So it was a properly joined up job. But we knew that we wanted to give it away as quickly as possible. So the only rules are use the symbol or the logo, the colours, and a couple of typefaces. Apart from that, go and do whatever. So that's the kind of, they're the rules, with lots of other assets. If you want to use them, you can, but you don't have to. And so that, I mean, I don't know what, at last count, just from our WeTransfer, we've had that downloaded about 10,000 times.
Wow.
I mean, God knows how else it then gets distributed after that. So that was the kind of antithesis of the way you normally do these things. You normally kind of have these rules and you write up the guidance and you kind of go, you have to follow these rules so that everything looks the same. But we did the polar opposite. So that was important. But then also we kind of knew that if XR was going to land, it had to be able to cope with lots of different people coming. It was going to be this kind of umbrella canopy, and you would attract people interested in politics or economics or environmentalism or animals or veganism or spirituality, or and all of these people would need to come to this movement. And so we needed something that would happily accommodate all those different voices. So that inspired the kind of the simplicity of things, things like multiple colours, so that it looked diverse. It wasn't just a green movement. And also the symbol, which we didn't design, we got permission to use it. It already existed as an extinction symbol, but it works really well. It's got that kind of literal meaning, but it's also got that iconic kind of heft, that sort of centre of gravity that immediately it was like, this is going to flutter on flags above people's heads, and it kind of didn't matter what the people looked like or what they were holding on their placards or what they were chanting, but the fact that they were holding the flag with the symbol on it was going to be enough to unite this kind of disparate sort of gaggle of people. And that's been amazing. So when you see, I don't know, there are some just mind-blowing pictures of like children in the occupied Gaza Strip with handmade placards with the symbol on, or there's been actions in Nigeria this week, and it's kind of like total ease of access to the materials, and some of it you kind of immediately recognise, and some of it is totally appropriate to the place that it springs up in. It's a complete decentralised experiment of kind of going, okay, well, here's this stuff.
Yeah.
It might be useful.
Yeah. But it's funny how it's all recognisable. It's funny that whatever it is that is encapsulated in the design is so universal for everyone that's what they use. There's been no kind of iteration that's been alien.
No, and I think key to that's probably the naming.
Right.
Because I think it identifies the problem as a universal problem. Extinction doesn't just affect people in Bangladesh or people in Alaska. That affects everybody
and everything.
And it runs trans species as well. So it's kind of like, we can't just go, oh well, we can lose the insects, but we'll be all right. So it's that kind of scale of things, but then attaches it to rebellion, and it attaches it to agency, and says, we don't want you to fill out a survey, we don't want you to send a petition, we don't want you to write to your MP, we don't want you to sit at home and think you can't do anything and be helpless. We want you to get off your backside and be in open rebellion at this system. And that kind of that agency, that sort of being able to do something, is the startings of then starting to kind of paint that kind of more hopeful picture. So it's not hope that's devoid of any kind of optimism. It's hope that's built out of actually just doing something. And it's kind of like, and in that respect, that's kind of that's a no lose situation, because okay, if the world is going to end in a fireball in 2 weeks' time, we're going to have a really lovely 2 weeks working with each other and doing great things, and it's going to be better than just sitting moping at home. So it's that kind of there's that sort of kind of hopelessness that is at the centre of it, that actually delivers some semblance of a better way to do things. And then of course if we win, and then it's great.
Yeah, it's amazing what you can do when you just empower people to take responsibility for, I don't know, for their own situation, rather than waiting for their, I've been calling it with some friends, neo-feudal overlords.
Well, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
What
would you say to young activists, actually, at the something inspiring? What would you say to people that want to go out and do something, and maybe they don't know where to start, or they don't know how to find a community, even given the lockdown? What would you say to them?
Yeah, well, finding the community, I suppose, is the first thing. And I guess, kind of the younger people are much more able to do that. They're digital natives. So that community can be found even whilst you're locked away from other people. But yeah, I would say just do that. Have daft ideas, and don't let old farts that look like me tell them that they can't do it. And the other piece of advice is don't wait as long as a lot of us did to pull your finger out and do it.
Yeah, okay. I love that that's the theme that runs through all of you, like this daftness, this daring to be absurd. It's not this like you don't have to think out, from point A to point Z. You have to.
No, you just do it.
Yeah.
And again, that's and it is daft and it's absurd, but it's also kind of it's fundamental as well. And for me, that goes again. We mentioned Shakespeare earlier. That's going right back to the idea of the fool at court. So you can be bizarre, you can be stupid, you can be funny, and you can not be taken seriously. But by being all those things, you can also have access to court, and you can say the truths that need to be said, because nobody else will. The courtiers, they're too busy looking after themselves and trying to advance their own agendas or whatever. So they will always, and we see it in science, we see it in academia. The more powerful you get, the as you go up through the ranks, the more beholden you are to behaving, because you don't want to upset the apple cart. You don't want your peers to think less of you. You don't want to cut off access to funding, and so therefore the more conservative you get, the more successful you are. Whereas if you just sort of burst out and go, "Had this great idea, what do you think? Let's just go and do it," and don't care, that's where you can do anything.
What an amazing note to end on. Thank you so much. I think that's wonderful, Charlie. I really, thank you so much.
Oh, thanks. It's been lovely.
Oh, it's been
Lovely
great
chatting.
speaking to you.
It's really good.
Yeah, unbelievable. Honestly.
Really enjoyed it.
Oh,
Thanks
good. I'm
so much for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much. Tell me, before we end, who would you like to platform?
I think, and I haven't tipped them off to this.
Excellent.
But I think you should speak to a wonderful filmmaker called Mark Silver.
Mark Silver. Why?
Because he has a similarly time-travelling, borderless perspective on things. And he's done a lot of work with the whistleblowers from Cambridge Analytica and Facebook and all that kind of stuff, Chris Wiley, and is doing a project with Shoshana Zuboff at the moment about surveillance economy and things like that. But he's also spent a long time working in the Amazon, and so he's got this amazing kind of perspective of yeah. So he's pretty cool.
Yeah, I'd like to speak to him. Thank you.
I'm sure he'd be up for it.
Oh, brilliant. Charlie, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure.
No, thank you.
Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for watching or listening. If you loved that, which I'm sure you did, please leave us 5 stars and also subscribe to Platform Enterprise over at www.platformenterprise.com. You can also find Charlie and his work over at thisain'trockandroll.com, which I'll put links to. Or if you're lucky, honestly, you'll just catch him somewhere in Brixton enjoying a coffee and an amazing chat. Oh, and before I go, I'm actually looking for writers, artists, photographers, videographers, anybody who is interested in making sense of our living crisis. If that's you, if you're interested in being published internationally on a new platform that's launching this summer, please don't hesitate to reach out to me at rachel@theimpossible.media. Leaving out a mystery there. Okay, everyone, thank you. See you next week.